my Crested Gecko warlord. He loves to jump, and he's probably looking again to jump at the camera tripod right now. He's quite active. He wants to jump. But anyways, this video is on warlord, and I'm gonna tell you all about his care and what goes into caring for a Crested Gecko. I always recommend to my viewers or to anybody who's looking into getting into reptile keeping is to make sure you have everything set up beforehand. Now, the first thing you want to do before you get your Crested Gecko is set up their enclosure properly. For the enclosure, there are a few different cages that you can get for your Crested Gecko. One including an aquarium that you can turn on its side, so it's going horizontal, so that means up and down, other than having it the long way. Just because Crested Geckos are arboreal, what that means is that they like being high up in that tree there. You can also get those front opening glass cages that most reptile stores or pet stores do sell, or what is kind of a better option too is that if you want a little bit lighter cage, you can get PVC or acrylic cages as well. End up being a little bit lighter for you to carry, but still act as the same as a glass aquarium or those expensive reptile cages would do. So for a hatchling or a juvenile, the recommended minimum size for a cage is a 12 by 12 by 18 tall, and for an adult, I believe it's 18 by 18 by 24 inches tall cage that most people recommend. Personally, I always like to say bigger is better, especially when we're talking about reptiles, just because they will utilize every single square inch of space in that cage. Don't forget, reptiles are often pretty active, especially some of the nocturnal ones, or Crested Geckos, I guess. They're more active during the dusk, the dawn and the dusk periods of the day. So early morning and just before the sun's about to go down or going down is when they're most active. They do like to climb and jump. As you could tell, Warlord was kind of going all over me. So please give your Crested Gecko enough room to get some exercise in their cage. So Crested Geckos are originally from New Caledonia, which is an island that's quite tropical and is quite humid. So when you're setting up your Crested Gecko's cage or enclosure, you want to kind of try and mimic that rainforest to the best of your ability and to the best you can do, so that your Crested Gecko feels nice and safe in that habitat. Now, there's a few different kind of enclosures you can kind of do. You can just go with the basic and just provide that substrate, those vines, and a ton of hiding spots for your Crested Gecko. Or there's actually a lot of people that have bioactive Crested Gecko enclosures, which means pretty much a live tank that's flourishing. It has the cleanup crew, isopods, you name it, just so that you don't have to clean your Crested Gecko's cage as often as I do, because I don't have a bioactive cage for him yet. But anyways, you want to try to mimic that environment for your Crested Gecko, just because what is in the nature and what they do in the wild, what it's like in the wild, we want to try to replicate that when we're keeping them captive bred. So Crested Geckos, they are considered omnivores. What that means is they like to eat plants, fruits, and insects. Now, good thing about Crested Geckos and why they're so popular with as a first reptile for many people is that the food is very accessible. So the food for Crested Geckos normally sold in the pet stores is Pangea or Rapashi. Now that is a powdered form of food that all you gotta do is just mix it with water till it forms kind of like a baby food kind of texture. And then you just put it in your Crested Gecko's cage at night, especially when they're most active, and then replace it every 24 hours, or you take it out after 24 hours, wait a few days, or wait a day or two and replace it with more food for your Crested Gecko. Now, Repashy is one of those scientifically developed foods for crested geckos from scientists that actually analyzed the feces and the poop in the wild. So they kind of had made this food based off that evidence and what they were eating in the wild and put it into powder form for your crested geckos. A lot of breeders actually use this for their baby crested geckos and adult crested geckos. A lot of breeders nowadays too are actually doing a mixture of both. So you might have, they might feed their crested gecko this powdered form of food mixed with water one day, and then the next day or the next few days later, they might feed their crested gecko some crickets. Now, this is what I like to do for Warlord just because it kind of gives him a variety of food. He'll get the nutrients and the vitamins that are supplied in that powdered food from the Repashy, but then he's also gonna get that calcium dusted cricket that I'll give to him every once in a while. Sometimes he doesn't take it. I might make a video on actually feeding my crested gecko crickets. We'll see about that. It's fun, it's interesting. Whichever method you do choose, if you choose to go the full powdered or a mixture, your crested gecko is gonna grow up healthy. On that note too, if you are thinking about feeding your crested gecko any type of live insects, make sure that you are gut loading your insects before you are feeding your crested gecko. A good kind of rule of thumb is once you are gut loading your insect, wait a day just so that all that nutrients that you're feeding your insects or your crickets, it's gonna be inside that belly of that insect so that when your crested gecko does eat it, they're also gonna get that nutrients that insect had devoured. All right, so let's go on to temperature. So for temperature for crested geckos, ideally the temperatures are gonna be a lot cooler than most geckos that you might keep. Now, most geckos or reptiles will need a type of heat source in order to digest their food. Crested geckos are those odd ones out that you actually don't need a heat source unless the temperatures are way out of whack in your house or wherever you are keeping your crested gecko cage. Ideally, the perfect temperature for a crested gecko is 68 Fahrenheit to 80 Fahrenheit. If you do go anywhere more above that, it could actually stress your crested gecko out a lot. That's why a lot of people don't use heat lamps for crested geckos, just because they do not like that high heat. So I always recommend when you are dealing with reptiles and you want to make sure that you're getting the right temperature is to buy a heat gun. Now, this heat gun is going to help you monitor the heat in your crested gecko's cage, and if you do find that it's dropping below that 68 degree Fahrenheit mark, you can always add a heat mat to the crested gecko's cage, but just make sure you are setting that up to a thermostat so that your crested gecko does not burn themselves. All right, so now for humidity, again, like I mentioned, you kind of want to replicate what it's like in that rainforest that crested gecko is living in back in New Caledonia. So crested geckos like a humidity range anywhere between 50 to 80% humidity. Now, the best time to do or up the humidity is to spray the cage during the night or the morning when they're most active. This way, it actually provides a water source for them to drink off the branches or the walls of the enclosure when they're most active. And if that water gets in on the moss that you put in your crested gecko's cage, that's also gonna help to keep the humidity high. It's always important to make sure your levels of temperature and humidity are kind of in the ranges that are recommended for the crested gecko, just because it is vital for their health. It helps them shed better, and then you're overall gonna have a happier gecko. Now, another thing I want to mention about crested geckos is they're not companion geckos. So you'll have some pets like maybe bunnies or ferrets that you want to get another one just to keep them company and to keep them healthy and active. Well, crested geckos, I don't at least consider them to be companion animals. For instance, if you put 2 male crested geckos in a cage together, they are going to fight for territory, and that is not really good for any reason. Some people say you can keep a male and a female together or 2 females together. Like I said, I don't recommend cohabiting any reptile together unless there's good research behind it, just because your gecko's gonna fight for territory, your gecko's gonna want to fight for competition over food, and overall it's just gonna raise that stress level for your crested gecko, and could technically greatly and drastically affect their health overall. So no, please don't keep your crested geckos in a cage together. That's keep them separate. So another good thing about crested geckos is they have a long lifespan. So if you are considering about getting a crested gecko, consider keeping it anywhere between 15 to over 20 years, with some crested geckos even living up to 30 years. I'm filming on my stairs right now and my dog kind of wants to come down, so he's making a whole bunch of noise. But yeah, so expect your crested gecko to live a long time. Anyways, thanks for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any other good care tips, please put them in the comment section below. If I did miss it, but you do think they're important to let other people know as well. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my channel. I am wanting to make a lot more videos on Warlord, as well as my other reptiles that I have. As you can see, I do have a cage in the back there. If you don't already follow me on social media, you might not already know what I got a new reptile.